The L-mount is getting a new lens and I'm so freaking excited because the L-mount needs more third-party lenses. You know, Lumix is putting out a good amount. I kind of wish there's a bit more, but what I really want are more third-party manufacturers jumping in on the L-mount and making more lenses that we all want to use. And 7 Artisans has finally jumped on the bandwagon and created the 50mm f1.8 for L-mount. In this video, we're going to talk about whether or not it's a good lens, whether or not you should pick it up, things I like and dislike about it, and well, is this going to replace my 50mm from Lumix because it's also an f1.8? Let's find out. Firstly, I'd like to thank 7 Artisans for sending me this lens in exchange for this video. They have no say in what I'm saying in this video, they don't get to see it before you guys, and no money was exchanged. I was happy to make this video because, hey, it's a new lens for the L-mount! I'm very excited about that. Having a 50mm lens in your kit is a necessity. It is probably the most purchased lens after you get your camera with that first kit lens. I mean, hey, who doesn't want to get a tighter focal length with that nice, beautiful f1.8 aperture? Enter the newest addition to the 50mm world for L-mount, the 50mm f1.8. I am so happy to see another L-mount lens from another company. But get this 50mm lens is only $228. Normally I save like the big price reveal towards the end of the video just to like hold on to people, but like, damn. For comparison, the Lumix 50mm f1.8 is almost $500 US. It's like 400 pounds, so whatever that is in US dollars will be on screen. I mean, that's just nuts. I think one of the main important factors of this lens comparison and seeing if the 7 Artisans 50mm is as good or better than the Lumix S 50mm f1.8 is the autofocus comparison. If you guys don't know, there's something called the L-mount Alliance, and this is basically where a bunch of companies have come together, and essentially it's like you can use whatever piece of gear with whatever other piece of gear, regardless of the company that it's from, because they're all part of the L-mount Alliance. This is pretty cool because it means like I could use Leica lenses on my Lumix cameras, or you can use DJI lenses on my Lumix or Leica cameras, and what have you. There's a bunch of other companies that have joined as well, Samyang being one of them. And as of me recording this, I don't know if 7 Artisans is part of the L-mount Alliance, but the autofocus on this thing has been pretty solid so far from all the testing I've been doing. But what I want to do now is I'm going to create a little side-by-side 2-camera rig with the S9 and the S5 Mark II. And because they're the same sensor, they have all the same functionalities and features, the autofocus from the camera side will be exactly the same. And so will the colors. So what I want to see is how the autofocus compares between these two 50mm lenses. Now, the one thing to bear in mind, I only have one of these ND filters. I do have another set, which is like their older, larger one. This is the V2, this is the K2. So I don't know how much that's going to affect color shifting. So just please bear that in mind. But right now, the autofocus test. So far, I'm actually very impressed. The autofocus seems to keep up exactly the same as Lumix's 50mm. So really, what is the downside here with this lens? Well, considering this lens is only $228, this is kind of looking like one of those lenses where you get a lot for very, very little. But there has to be a catch somewhere because unfortunately there always is.
But here's the big one. Is there a difference in image quality? Because that could be a no-no for a lot of people. If there's like color differences or something like that compared to the Lumix 50mm, well, things don't look too great. But from my own testing, I honestly cannot see a difference between two lenses. Here are some shots where I have shot the exact same thing on the exact same camera, the S5 Mark II, exact same settings, down to the f-stop, shutter angle, everything is identical. The only thing that's changed is the lens itself. They both also had the same ND filter on the front at the same strength. So there's literally no difference. I wasn't even sure if I had remembered to change the lenses. That's how similar these lenses are looking to me. And color me impressed, because for this price, that's actually pretty astonishing. The next thing I did notice in terms of image quality is there's this kind of ghosty flaring effect happening. And the first time I made this happen was completely by accident. I was just filming Arlo, and you can see here there's like this ghostly looking flaring. Now it kind of looks cool. It's also a little bit distracting. So it kind of depends what you want to do, what your personal taste is. I'm in both camps. If I want a clean image, then this is kind of annoying, and I don't really experience this with my other lenses that often. Obviously, if you shine any lens into direct sunlight or into direct artificial light as well, you will get flaring. So it could have just been that, but I just found that kind of interesting because it wasn't like I was shining it directly into the sun here, but either way. But yeah, I feel like to truly figure this out, we should just go ahead and do a flare test between this and the Lumix 50mm. So it's very apparent to me that the 7 Artisans lens flares way more than the Lumix lens. That's kind of, I was guessing that from the price point. But what is very interesting to me is, for this test, I stood in the same point. I basically just stood and pointed the lens away from the light, then towards the light, to see how much towards the light does the lens need to be pointing for the flaring to really begin. And the 7 Artisans 50mm began flaring around when we got to this like tube light that's on my stand here, this shelf that you're on right now. And that was pretty far away from the light. Like, if you're side on to some light, you'll get some flaring. That's kind of crazy and possibly not great, depending on your stance. It wasn't a lot of flaring, but it's where it begins. And the more you turn towards the light, the more intense the flaring gets, and it really does fill up your image quite a lot. Now, again, artistic preference, whether or not you like it is up to you, and I don't know, it depends on what you're shooting. However, what was interesting with the Lumix lens was, for one, the flaring was a lot more tame, a lot more controlled. Very nice, clean, image. You still get flaring, obviously, when you point it towards the light, but it didn't begin flaring in the same point that the 7 Artisans lens did. Instead, I had to go a little bit further, and the clip cuts here because everything went out of focus, so I fixed it, and I just thought, let me just cut that little section where I'm messing around with the focus, getting it back on correctly and everything. But basically, it began to flare a little bit where the curtain comes to an end on the wall. So you get to turn a lot more towards the light before you get any sort of flaring, and the flaring that starts to happen is a lot less than the amount that starts to happen with the 7 Artisans. It seems to me that the 7 Artisans lens clearly wants to flare out a lot more, and this can very easily fill out your entire image. I mean, the fact that you can be side on to the light is just like, whoa. But whether or not this is an issue to you completely depends on, 1, the kind of creator you are, and 2, the kind of thing you're shooting. If you want something that's like really flary and, I don't know, airy, light, kind of just like nice, sort of, how vibey is that? I don't know if that's the word, but you know what I mean? Then the flares might not be an issue to you. However, if you're trying to shoot something that's very clean, very commercial, for example, then I could definitely see it being a bit of a problem. The next issue I have with it might not be an issue for you, but it is for me. If you're someone who already has some of the S Prime lenses from Lumix, having this added to your collection can be a little bit of a nuisance, and it's so minute, but it does kind of matter. Especially if you're swapping lenses very often, because these are all primed and you want to use a different focal length, what have you. Well, it's actually the front filter thread. Very cleverly, Lumix made all of these S prime lenses basically identical in terms of size, in terms of weight, but definitely in regards to the front filter thread. They are all a 67mm front filter thread, which means when it comes to using filters, or if you want to use step-up rings because you already have an ND filter, let's say, but it's like an 82mm, right? Which is the case for me, because then you avoid vignetting. All I have to do is take the one step-up ring that goes from 67 to 82 that I own, and boom, I can swap it onto all of my lenses. Or if you have multiple step-up rings, same thing. This is a 62mm front filter thread, which means I had to get a different set of step-up rings. And yes, it's so small, it's so minute, but it was another thing to buy. It stopped me on the day of getting it from actually going out and filming anything because I couldn't put an ND filter on the front, and it's just one more thing to have to think about and pack into my bag. Now, is this a big deal or a con of the lens? No, not at all. It's like, this doesn't affect the image quality, this doesn't affect anything apart from how you use the lens, I would say. And that in itself is kind of almost just as important, in my opinion, as how the lens itself performs. Because if something's annoying to use, it could be the most prettiest thing in the world, but I'm probably gonna grab something that's much easier to use more often.
Now, what are some of the things that I do like about this lens? Well, I'm really enjoying having an aperture ring. I used to have a Sony a7S Mark II, like I bought it kind of when it came out. And with that lens, I bought a 35mm Zeiss, and it also had an aperture ring. And that was my first lens that had an aperture ring. So having this not only shape of lens, full metal construction, and an aperture ring, it's really kind of nostalgic for me because it's taking me back to that first Sony lens I used to have. Now, aperture rings, whether you use them or not, they are a nice feature to have in a lens just because it gives you the option, especially a declicked one, to be able to go between apertures very, very easily with your hand already being on the lens most of the time. Unless you're doing gimbal stuff, then I guess not. As we saw in the autofocus test, this lens clearly keeps up like it's a native L-mount lens, which is superb to see. I'm really, really happy that it keeps up with Lumix's very own 50mm. And for the price as well, I think the f1.8 aperture, at least the fact they matched it with Lumix's 50mm, they're kind of making it hard to choose Lumix's 50mm over theirs.
Color me impressed with this lens because I can't really find much to fault about it. The flaring is the only thing about it that truly makes it like a bit of a meh, you know, when you're looking at buying this compared to the Lumix 50mm. Now, if you don't have a 50mm already, then this just seems like a great option. It's budget friendly, it's small, it's got great build quality, and it has an aperture ring. That's something that the Lumix lens just doesn't have, the aperture ring. Everything else about it is very good. If you want a cleaner image though, I think the Lumix lens is the better option, and if you are looking to buy some of the other S prime lenses, then obviously it makes a lot more sense to just stick with the S prime lenses. 7 Artisans, you did a good job. Genuinely, I'm impressed with this lens. Now the real question is, am I gonna keep this lens? And unfortunately, no, I'm not. I already have a really great 50mm lens from Lumix, and the fact that it is the same size as my 18mm means for things like bouncing on a gimbal and the front filter threading and all of that stuff I've already spoken about in this video, it just makes it more convenient to stick with that 50mm than the one we've made this video about. So I've got some great news. I'm actually going to be giving this lens away to one of you guys. All you have to do is 2 things. 1, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell notifications, and 2, click that link down below and join my mailing list. It's completely free, no charge necessary, and with that mailing list sign up, you actually get a free sample pack of LUTs, so even if you don't win this giveaway, you still get a little something. That's all you have to do. At the end of this month, I'll be choosing a winner, and I'll be contacting you using the email that you used for the mailing list, so please make sure it's correct. Best of luck to all of you. In the meantime, why don't you click on one of these 2 videos over here so you can learn a little bit more about the cameras I used to make this video.